Greetings, fellow time travelers and everyone still stuck on Earth. This is another LinuxCollections.com how-to video for your education, information, and entertainment. Let's get rolling. Today we're going to do a Debian 8.6.0 install, just a basic install on your typical older 386 system. This is actually the i386 distribution release. So we begin with the first boot up screen, which is the installer boot menu, as you can see. And we are going to select the graphical install so you can check out and see how that works here. So you drop down, you do that, and you move on. The first question, of course, is what language do you want to do? Obviously, Debian is an established distribution, has many languages available all over the world. I am an English speaker here in America, so we're going to just continue on with that. So English, United States, American English. And then it will go through a process and load up enough of the components based on the English side to continue with the install. The next step will be to configure the network. Now, this of course depends on your network and how you are configured. Ideally, this installer expects you to have a DHCP type approach where you will get internet access through the DHCP or the Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, and it will go out to your DHCP server, ask for a wonderful IP address that has internet access. So that'll go on. We'll do the IPv6 auto configuration. This is the next generation internet protocol, is what that is for if you're not familiar with that. Then it's going to ask you what your host name of the system is. It'll default to a Debian. In our case, we are going to actually change it to My Backups. This was going to be a sample backup server, so we're just going to give it something like this. This, of course, would be a name that might configure best with your network, home network, the way you name your computers, what have you. So this is the host name for this server. Now this is going to be a backup system for some Windows computers, so a good name to use is Workgroup. This typically is the default Windows server group, or not the domain necessarily, but for Windows and Windows networks it's the network name. And so we're going to use that for the workgroup, and after that it will ask for the root password. So for people not familiar with Linux, the root is the administrative or administrator account, and this is the ultimate control user that can do everything in the system. All other permissions and security privileges come from this user. So in our case, this is going to be a test backup server, no security. This is just a way to quickly get in there. One default password that I've used is just Linux, and so that's what this password is for this root. Obviously, if you are concerned about security, you're going to want to put a lot more effort into password for the root user, and it explains here that a good password contains a mixture of letters, numbers, and punctuation, and should be changed at regular intervals. Now, most of us don't do that, but it really depends on your actual usage scenario, how many people can physically access the server. This is for something serious or for something that you really don't care about security. And in this case, we're just using a simple Linux 5-letter password. Now, Debian requires you to create a user. In fact, you no longer can, in a lot of distributions, you can't log on as the root user in the graphical environment. There's various security reasons for this, so you are asked to create a username. And in our case, again, security is not a concern. We are just simply going to create a user called a user. That's right, USER. The user name of the account, this typically might be, like here, it's your first name, more details. It's just a slightly distinction between the logon name and then the name of the account. In our case, we're still going to use user, and in fact, for the password, we're going to use user. Pretty easy to remember. The name is the password, or the name is the word is the password. You can get in with typing user, password, user. And that's what we're doing here. Again, no security, and that is not a concern on this install. In your case, you need to make that determination and use the appropriate security, and then continue on with additional users if that makes sense. I'm on the California West Coast here, so I'm going to select the Pacific time, and then the partition phase will kick in. So it'll load some more information and step through that, and then it will ask you how do you want to partition the disk. You have the option of just using a simple, straightforward guided approach, and this for new users is the recommended approach. Depending on your usage of a server and how you're going to deal with it, you do have the option to manually at the bottom here set up partitions and assign the mount points, and that gets deep into the configuration of a Linux system. For our purposes, we're not going to delve into that here. We just simply want a server up and running, so we're going to use the default top guided use entire disk approach. So that'll use one partition for the whole disk. Everything's going to be on that one partition. And this is the hard drive we have in there. It's just a 40 gig old drive that I'm using for this sample server, and away we go. And then it's going to confirm what you're doing, and essentially that it's saying all the files in one partition. You can separate it, and again, this is there's various reasons why that's good. We're not going to dwell on that at this install. We're just going to take the default all files in one partition. So then it gives you the steps that it's going to perform. You do have the option to go back or change this and configure things if you realize that this is not what you want. In our case, we're just going to select the finish partitioning and write those changes to the disk. We'll ask you that this is going to destroy the data. This is, if this hard drive had something on it, this will be the end of that data, as it basically rewrites the partition table and does a format for the new Linux file system. So we're going to say yes, write the changes to disk, and then it will go through, do the partitioning, and step through those steps. At that point, it will start installing the base system. So where we're at right now is we've gone through the basic defaults for the Debian install. We've partitioned the disk, formatted the disk with a file system, and we are now going to start installing the Linux operating system for Debian onto our hard drive. And then it steps through that. At this point, it's asking us, how do you want to handle what's called the init-rd, which is the basic first step of the kernel, where it will start up and running Linux from the hard drive. So it actually reads in this basic system into RAM, and that's the starting point for it. Again, in this case, we're just going to take the default generic. Again, this is a more advanced option for new users. No reason to dwell on this. This is just a specific option that Debian gives you to decide how you want to handle things. And in this case, the all available drivers default step is what we're going to do. So it will then scan the CD-ROM, and at this point, as we'll see, is we have the option, and this is how the Debian package management system works. As you see here, we've scanned our Debian GNU Linux 8.6.0 Jessie release. This is the official i386 DVD binary 1. And so let's scan the disk. Now, if we actually want the operating system on this hard drive, after we boot up and we don't have any disks around, to know where to find a particular package, we can scan all the disks that come with it. So with the full Jessie 8.6.0 system, you've got 13 Debian install disks that DVDs that can be scanned, and in fact we'll go ahead and do that. In this case, it's we don't anticipate updating this or even having this server connected to the internet, and in fact it's going to be a local backup server. So in case we need something, we're going to go ahead and scan. So we're going to say yes, and then we're going to scan another disk, and as we continue, we'll get to the 13th disk of the set. At that point, we don't want to scan another disk, and now apt has done, this is the package manager for Debian, it will have scanned all the disks and recorded where they are and what packages are on those. So when we ask for a particular package, it will know which disk to ask for. And that's what that's all about. After that point, we now are asked about the popularity contest. Again, in this case, in this scenario, we're not going to have internet, and we don't participate in this. And so I'm just going to say no, I don't want to participate in the package usage survey, and we're done with that. Then it will do some more whirling and whizzing, and we'll come up with a option to select what system type is going to be installed. And in fact, in this case, we're going to select the Debian desktop. Typically I prefer KDE, although GNOME is very popular, and then there's the Cinnamon and LXDE, the light desktop environment that's available. So there's options here. If you're not familiar, the two main popular ones are the KDE and GNOME. KDE is a little bit closer to a Windows type environment. Just in case, we're going to put a print server and the standard system utilities, and then away we go. And at this point, it's on autopilot, and it is going to start installing software. So it will continue on for quite a while, keep basically grabbing packages and installing them, and finally we'll get to the bootloader. Grub is Grand Unified Bootloader. It's pretty much the common bootloader for Linux at this point. It does have a lot of options. It's very flexible. In this case, this system is just going to boot one operating system, Debian, that we just installed, and we will just accept the defaults and say, yes, we want this hard disk to have the bootloader and load up. So at this point, it says, do you want to put the Grub bootloader on the master boot record? And as I just described, yes, we do. We want this system to boot up and get going, and there's no options. It's just we want it to load the operating system we just installed. So it confirms the device, and we then say yes, and you'll see here we're finishing the installation. It's setting up the users and passwords. And finally, we will get to the installation complete. So now we remove our disks and we are ready to boot. And at that point, you will see the boot screen, and this is the Grub. We'll select Debian GNU Linux, and we are off and running with our backup server. So that finishes this quick how-to kind of overview of what the Debian 8.6.0 install does. Glad that you joined us for this. This is LinuxCollections.com signing off.